Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namissami. Good evening, wherever you are on the planet, and welcome to another of these Sunday webcasts from Amaravati, the continuing lockdown. I think this is about week 11, and in terms of the travel restrictions and social distancing and so forth. This week I was particularly asked to offer some reflections by a family, a man called Sumeta Vijaya Siri passed away and had his funeral. He was 45 years old, and his father, I believe, called and requested if I could give some reflections on the topic of parents who have lost their young child. So this is so particularly with respect to Sumeta Vijaya Siri. He had a brain hemorrhage and passed away, fell asleep reading a book and didn't wake up. So that was very sudden and unexpected passing away. So I thought I would begin this week by offering a few thoughts, perspectives on this. Firstly, it was interesting to me how if I'm understanding the request correctly, that the father said the death of a young child. 45 years old doesn't seem to be. It was kind of interesting to think of someone at the age of 45 being considered young, if that was what was meant. But it said, well, when you're a parent, then someone's always your child. Whether you might be 90 and your child might be 70, but still they're your baby. And so that we can easily fix these relationships in stone, that I am the parent, I am the child, and we exist sort of solely in this relationship with each other. Or we're part of the same family, and that we have this kind of absolute bond or absolute relationship is how we tend to perceive things. That say, I can do that in the monastery. I am the Ajahn. These are the nuns and monks, and I am the teacher in this place. And I can hold that as an absolute and fixed quality if I want to, but if I do, then that creates a lot of dukkha and division, and it is not particularly helpful. I can see more skillfully that yes, I can be in the role of teaching when that's appropriate, but I don't have to be the teacher all the time. I don't have to be the abbot all the time. I can relate to the other people who live here, the people who come to be part of this community, people who used to visit. we don't have any visitors now at all, but that I can relate on a simple human-to-human basis, and that's the same within our families. Yes, one person might be the parent, one person might be the child, but also along with that dynamic, that relationship, we're also fellow living beings sharing a life together for however long that period of time extends. And I feel that the more that we have a perspective, and we can use the Buddha's teaching and practice to really help us, the more that we can see that our own conditioning, our own perceptions, our own way of holding a situation, it can be seen from a broader perspective. So in terms of reflections on someone having a young child, so whether they're 45 or whether they're 4 or whether they're a day old, or a child is stillborn, or a child is lost during pregnancy, those are still powerful and anguished feelings. There's a strong and intense emotional impact from that event, particularly for the mother, but for the whole family as well. So it's important to respect that, But what the Buddha's teaching encourages us to see that, yes, there are those particular close relationships and ways that we bond with each other, but also we need to remember that we're part of a living system, that our bodies are part of the natural order, and we're not in control. There isn't a kind of a personal choice involved in whether someone lives or dies. We can do what we can to keep people healthy, just like having the lockdown procedures and trying to keep the virus minimized and to reduce the stress and difficulty, suffering and illness owing to the coronavirus. But we're not in control, and that's there's been a lot of comments about the UK government's statement, control the virus, and a number of people saying, well, the point is we can't control it. That's the difficulty. So I feel that along with the natural, personal way that we relate to being a parent or having a child, and the sense of care and bond that there is with another being in that way, it's important to remember we're part of a natural system and we're not in control. Ajahn Chah used to say, sickness and death are not polite, they have no manners. They just show up and push the door in and take over, just like as if they own the place. They don't ask permission. They just show up and take command. And so that is something that is painful or difficult, and we can feel resentful of that or think, oh, it shouldn't be this way. But if we hang on to those feelings, then we're not seeing things in terms of the natural order. So it's the Buddha's teaching is quite challenging in this respect. It asks us to receive those painful feelings and say, yeah, that's the natural result of being a parent or bonding closely with another being. It's natural for us to have this tensing in the heart, this anguish, difficulty, and pain in the heart. That's the natural result of bonding with another being in that way. But it's up to us whether we add an attitude of wrongness. If we add onto it, it shouldn't be this way, or this isn't fair, or that I didn't sign up for this. That's what the mind is adding to it. And if we reflect this, our life, our body, our being, we can try and control things to the best of our ability, but still, we need to breathe, we need to eat, we live in relationship with each other, we live in relationship to the planet, and this life is part of an organic system that's not under personal control. And so that the Buddha's advice is to recollect, to bring to mind every day, I am of the nature to age, I am of the nature to sicken, I am of the nature to die. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So to our ego, to our sense of self, that can all be very threatening and depressing. That can be very painful to hear. Like, I don't want to think that. I don't want to be dwelling on that. But the Buddha's not encouraging that, that set of reflections, what are called the 5 subjects for frequent recollection, as in a kind of malicious or a kind of hurtful way, but rather he's helping us to be realistic and to say, this is what we're part of. This body, I arrived here just before 2 o'clock, it's now 8 minutes past 2, I'm 10 minutes older. We're all 10 minutes older than we were when this webcast began. We are aging, the body is aging. We are of the nature to sicken. The body can't possibly maintain itself in a state of perfect health permanently. There will never come a day when doctors don't have a job, when they close hospitals because there's no sick people, when the doctor's surgery is closed down, or a career in nursing is pointless because nobody gets ill anymore. I strongly suspect if nature carries on working in the way that it does, that day will never ever come. This is the way nature works. And these bodies die. They're born and they live a particular lifespan. It may be a few days, it may be a few years, maybe decades and decades. But inevitably, these bodies stop breathing. They die, just as the Buddha's body also. He breathed his last when his body was 80 years old. And even a great enlightened being like the Buddha will still... the life of the body comes to its natural end. So the mind doesn't have to add on any kind of feeling of wrongness, or it shouldn't be this way. And that's really where the dukkha, the suffering, comes in. There's a painfulness that comes from being separated from what we love, but it's what the mind adds to it. It's like, it shouldn't be this way, not now, this isn't fair, how could this happen? And it's challenging to really receive that loss or that painfulness and not add anything to it. But that's really what the teaching encourages. And what we find is that if we train the mind, we use these kind of reflections to help us, then yes, that there might be a feeling of sadness or a grief, a sense of loss, but that is not something that is creating more stress or tension in the heart. It's painful, but it's absolutely okay. There's pain, but there's no suffering around it. And this is something that is, I think, incredibly precious and beautiful as a result of practicing the Dhamma, practicing the Buddha's teachings. There can be a lot of pain, physical pain or emotional pain, and yet the mind is completely at peace with it. You're not waiting for it to be over, you're not resenting that it's there, you're not feeling it shouldn't be this way. It's still painful, it still hurts, but there's no wrongness being added to it. And that, I would suggest, is the crucial thing. Over the years, I've known many people, almost when we used to have visitors, not every day, but several times a week, I would have people coming to visit, people coming to make offerings in memory of a family member who's passed away. Often it's a parent or a grandparent. Often it's a spouse. Also, often it's a child. And so there's many people I know who've lost children either in middle age, let's say 45, in similar ways to Sumeta. I remember a family coming to me a couple of years ago and saying that the mother, again with 2 or 3 teenage children, was getting the kids ready for school, just making the breakfast, said, "I feel very strange." Sat down on the chair in the kitchen and died at the kitchen table, similarly with a brain hemorrhage. Ajahn Amaro, who was living here for some time, was one of the senior monks of our community. He was married and had children before he was a monk. His eldest son went to sleep one night and didn't wake up in the morning. He knew he had some heart problems, but he was busy with his life and carried on with his work, his duties, and went to bed, not realizing the extent of his illness, and didn't wake up in the morning at the age of 42. So these things happen, and I feel that if we contemplate the assumptions that we make, or we assume that because we're a parent that our children will die after us, or that we can expect to have a comfortable life or good health, or that we have the right to assume that we're healthy now and we'll be healthy next week or next year or in 10 years' time, and our children will similarly be enjoying good health. That's a foolish assumption, I would say. The Buddha encouraged active contemplations of death. There's a few of the other questions this week relate to that. And he said, if we're wise, then we recognize that our human lifespan, we think of, even in the Buddha's time, they said 70 years as an average human lifespan. And he said that's not a wise consideration. Then somebody else said, well, maybe 60. We can expect to live to 60 years or 50 years. And then each one he said, no, that's a foolish expectation. And he's asking, what is the length of a human lifespan? What can we reasonably expect? What's the amount of time that we can reasonably expect to live? And it goes through one person after another, the length of time getting shorter and shorter. And someone says, the time it takes to eat a meal, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And he said, that's not realistic. And then finally someone says, the time it takes to go from the beginning to the end of an in-breath, or the beginning to the end of an out-breath. And finally the Buddha said, yes. You understand. So that's how long we can reasonably expect to live, the time it takes for literally for an aneurysm to hit and for everything to go dark and for you to keel over, which is seemingly about 3 or 4 seconds. So that from this breath beginning to the end of the out-breath, that's it. 3 or 4 seconds. That's what we can reasonably expect. And that might be very threatening or intimidating, but if we recognize, that's medically and realistically, and also according to the Dhamma, what we can expect, then it really brings your attention to the present moment. It brings our attention to what the mind is creating, planning for, what am I going to do after the lockdown? If you've only got another 3 or 4 seconds, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen after the lockdown. Again, not to be intimidating or threatening, but seeing what those perceptions do to the mind, to see, that really shakes things up. About 25 years ago, I was diagnosed with melanoma and skin cancer, and it was unknown what stage it was at. And the previous year, one of the people in the Buddhist group in San Francisco had been also diagnosed with melanoma, and she was told she was going to be dead by Christmas. It was a misdiagnosis, but I spent a lot of time that year counseling her and helping her to deal with this idea that she's only got another 5 or 6 months to live. So then the next year, I was diagnosed with the same illness. And so then I had to counsel myself. But it was very interesting because Abhayagiri Monastery had only been opened. This was, the monastery opened in June of 1996. I was diagnosed in October, and I was in the middle of my new project, starting a new monastery, first Ajahn Chah Branch Monastery in California, and maybe I'll be dead by Christmas. Who knows? And so that was a really helpful reflection. You could see, okay, I'm expecting a lot. I've got plans. I've got things I'm intending to do, but will they happen? Will someone else do them? Will they not happen? So it's these kind of reflections that they are threatening to the ego, to the habits of self-view, but they are liberating to the heart, because we don't realize how much we're carrying around by way of expectation. And that when we drop those expectations and we say, take those considerations to heart, like, if I've only got a few more seconds to live, what do I want to do with this moment? What do I want to be carrying around? What do I think is unfinished? And then we let go. There's a freshness, there's a brightness and alertness that comes into our life when we say, don't carry around those agendas and assumptions. We still take care of the things on our list, but we're not making assumptions about how long we're going to be here, or how long anyone around us is going to be here. So it makes us really appreciate very, very genuinely, very heartfully, the time that we have with each other. We look to see the ways that we can help each other, and we learn not to carry grudges around. We learn not to dwell in the past or the future, because this present reality is the only reality there is. And so it helps us to appreciate that. And this is also where we can make a difference in our life, this present moment, this present reality. This is the place where we can really make significant changes in our life. We can't change things in the past, and we can't change things in the future. This moment is where we can make a difference. So these kind of reflections help us to be very alert to the present. So I'll go to a few of the other questions that have come in this week. And the first one is about death contemplations. The Buddha said to Ananda that one should contemplate death all the time. Please, can you give suggestions as to how this could be done? Also, during meditation, and especially on a retreat, cravings seem to be kept somewhat in abeyance. especially the obvious ones such as craving for food and sleep. But very soon after the end of a retreat, the cravings come up, are not seen, and are indulged in. Clearly, the mindfulness is not at the same level as on a retreat, but short of being in a permanent retreat, it seems very difficult to maintain a level of mindfulness whereby cravings can be let go of. With gratitude for the teachings and the Triple Gem. So, as I was saying, that reflection that if you've only got another 3 or 4 seconds to live, what do you want to be putting the mind on? What's important? What really has value? How many people are you carrying around? And how much unfinished business is there? So, again, to restate that, this isn't just an idle reflection, it's something that is, helping us to make the attention to the present reality the priority. Because we so easily dwell in the past, we dwell in the future, how it could be, how it should be, how it used to be. But this is where we can make a difference. And so this, having that sense of immediacy in our practice. Other ways of reflecting on death, there's a number of different things. The different ways of looking at the body. Again, I was talking about this body as part of an organic, natural process, just considering the fabricated, formed nature of the body, and that it's come together, it's integrated in this form of a human life, but inevitably it will disintegrate. And so that contemplation of the body, and just seeing it as the collection of elements, either the sort of periodic table type elements, or the classical elements of the earth, water, fire, and wind structure that we have in the Buddha's teachings, so that it's just changing the way that the body is seen. It's just earth, water, fire, and wind coming together in this particular configuration, and it takes this shape at this time, but how could that be a permanent thing? And so reframing the way that the body is seen is a helpful thing. A way of, in a sense, extending or maybe modifying the 3 to 4 seconds reflection a little bit, a meditation practice that I've done very often. It works best if if you're not keeping your eye on the clock, but you've set a timer, or you've got an incense stick burning or something to signal the length of time for the meditation. But when I was living here, I wasn't the abbot. I was a junior, or sort of one of the more junior monks living here. I used to do this for every meditation period with when Luang Por Sumedho would be leading the meditations and ring the bell at the end. And at the beginning of the sitting, I would actively consider, okay, this is the last 45 minutes or last hour of my life. And when the Ajahn rings the bell at the end of the sitting, that's my last moment. And so what do I want to be paying attention to? If this was the last few minutes of my life, what would be useful to be paying attention to? So I would set that up most of the time when I was practicing meditation, and to use this as a way of keeping the attention fresh and looking at that sense of distraction. I used to look after the office here and organize a lot of the events and activities. So I always had my list of things to do is usually a page or two long. So this kind of meditation was very helpful, because I could easily be dwelling in the future and what needed to be done, and the kind of program. And so then when Luang Por Sumedho would ring the bell, often it was quite sort of shocking. Oh my goodness, what's my mind dwelling on? And then I would give myself the time it takes for the sound to fade away is the time I've got to let go of everything and get ready for this to be the end. So sometimes you had to do some very quick letting go to drop a whole pile of stuff the mind was carrying around before the sound faded. But I felt that was a very skillful practice. So in a number of retreats here on death and dying, I've conducted what's called a death rehearsal meditation. And that's I've done it a few times. Here in the temple, have the women lying down on one side, the men lying down on another side, and everyone has a couple of mats to lie on. And then I would give a guided meditation as if that was the last 45 minutes or hour of everybody's life, and with the same structure, that when I ring the bell, that's the last moment. But then during the meditation, I would guide people through 4 different reflections. So these can be used in terms of preparing for death or a death rehearsal. First of all, to recollect the people and the events of your life that you're grateful for, to bring to mind what you've received and blessings and benefits from others, to actively consider all of that. Then to consider your resentments, the grudges, people who hurt you, either people close to you or people in the government or in the horrible school teachers or people that you worked with who mistreated you and such like. All the grudges, resentments, hurts that we're carrying around, to visit those and to let those go. Then the third one is to look back at your regrets, to look at your own life, your own actions, your words, the things that you've done that you feel regretful for, that you feel, oh, that was really stupid, why did I do that, that was such a big mistake. And again, to receive that, to know that, and to let it go. So, well, now it's all over, this life is finished, the lessons could be learned from those foolish things that were done, and it's time to drop them. And then the last of the 4, which many people would find the most challenging, is to recollect your good qualities, the good things that you've done. And so we're somewhat conditioned to not be proud or inflated or egotistical, but this is actually a practice recommended by the Buddha called Chagganusati, recollecting your own goodness. And so to go through your memories and the things that you've done with your life, the way that you've been, the work that you've done and the relationships that you've had, and to consider the good that has been done, to say, yeah, well, I'm glad I did that. That was beautiful. I'm glad I made the effort. Or yeah, that had a good result, and I'm pleased with that. So those are the 4 contemplations for a death rehearsal. But the point being, you recollect them, not to hang on to them or keep them or cherish them, but you recollect them, receive them, and then let them go, the painful and the pleasant, the inner and the outer. So that is another way of preparing for death and to bring death to mind. Also, in terms of the second part of that question about after a retreat, cravings reappear and such like, that it's good to, in that respect, to consider, it's not just because there's a retreat routine and everyone's keeping noble silence and you don't have to cook and such like, or you're cooking, you're chopping vegetables in the kitchen. But rather, I think that it's good to recollect that a lot of that restraint is because of the people that you're with, or the way you're spending your time, and that there's one of the most significant teachings of the Buddha is about what is the fuel for ignorance, what makes our mind unmindful, what makes us get lost, what makes us get confused. And he points out, there's a sort of a long sequence of different qualities. He said is the immediate cause for avijja, for ignorance, is the 5 hindrances: sense desire, ill will, restlessness, dullness, and doubt. And what feeds the 5 hindrances? Unskillful speech, unskillful action, unskillful mental states. And what feeds the unskillful mental states? Well, that's a lack of sense restraint, being reactive and rather than responsive, just being impulsive in the way that we function. And what's the cause for being impulsive or lack of sense restraint? Not having mindfulness and clear comprehension. What's the cause for the lack of mindfulness and clear comprehension? Is lack of wise reflection. What's the cause of the lack of wise reflection? Is not having faith. What's the cause of not having faith? Not listening to the Dhamma. What's the cause of not listening to the Dhamma or attending to Dhamma teachings? Is lack of good friends, not spending time with good people. So at the very root is what's called sapurisa sangseva, spending time with good people. So outside of a retreat situation, then to the degree that it's possible, it's helpful to consider who you're spending your time with. What are we putting our attention on? What ways are we feeding ignorance and making things more difficult for ourselves? And that if we are a bit more discerning about who we spend our time with, how we spend our time, what we put our attention on, then we can, to some degree, we can deprive avijja, ignorance, of its fuel. So, next one. Venerable Ajahn, thank you for always answering our questions. Well, I make noises. I don't necessarily answer every question, but I try to respond, and I hope that my responses are generally useful. The more I practice the Dhamma, the more I find my current life incompatible with it. Most friends and family do not share the same values or ideas, and although I do not feel a sense of comparison nor pity, I just feel that the fact that a layman's life and the true teachings of the Dhamma are not compatible. This is probably why people ordain. I think the answer to that is yes. But also I would be encouraging that but I wouldn't say that a lay life is not compatible with Dhamma practice. The vast majority of Buddhists around the world are lay people, they're not monastics. And that certainly the Buddha set up the monastic order to make the practice of Dhamma as easy as possible, but and so that's why he set things up the way he did. It's particularly crafted to make things as simple as possibly as is possible in the human realm. So that's why we have the living structures, the precepts, the customs, and so forth that we do. I mean, it's not an accident that we shave our head, we're celibate, we wear robes and such like. That's not just a kind of a fashion choice. The Buddha crafted the Dhamma Vinaya and monastic life very purposefully. But for many people, their life as a layperson is dictated or necessitated because of family considerations or commitments and other issues. So I would say it's a mistake to think that a lay life is incompatible with Dhamma. And even from the Buddha's time right up to the present, there's huge numbers of people, a large proportion of people who live a lay life but are very dedicated to Dhamma practice, and for whom the practice of Dhamma is very, very effective. So I would say that it's particularly the thing of particular importance is the attitude with which we are relating to our living situation, so that if there is a quality of attachment or identification, or that I'm not going to be a monastic because I don't agree with this and I don't like that, and there's a kind of tension or a fixity of view in the attitude, then so that there's a conscious attachment to lay life, or an opposition to the renunciant form, or an opposition to some of the principles that the Buddha established, then any kind of view that we cling to will cause suffering. But I know quite a number of lay practitioners. There's a resident community of lay people here at Amaravati, and I've known many places around the world. And that it's much more the living in the form of a layperson. There's a convenience, or there's particular reasons for it, but there isn't an attachment to it. There's not an identification with it. It's just a way to arrange the affairs of your day for various purposes. Then that's the way you're doing it this lifetime, and it's good enough. And that. If one has that more spacious attitude towards your living situation, and in a way I encourage that with monastic life as well. If you're solidly identified with, I'm a monk, I'm absolutely a monk, and I hate, I'd never be a layperson, I hate lay life, it's really bad because of this, and this. That fixity of view about monastic life and that attachment to the monastic form is going to be an obstacle, even though the form is there to help liberate the heart. If you're attached to being a nun or a monk, and this is good and right and absolutely perfect, that very tensing, that rigidity, fixity of view is going to be an obstacle. You won't be able to use the forms of Dhamma Vinaya that the Buddha established for the purpose for which they were intended. The way that the mind is holding them is creating more of an obstruction. So I would say that the attitude is the most important thing. And if because of family considerations or commitments or other issues, then you're living in the medium of a lay life, then if you have a skillful attitude towards it, towards your possessions, your living place, the relationships that you can have a life that is very unencumbered, unburdened by duties and frugal in your ways, and that it can be a very effective medium. I'm a monk because I ran into this when I was very young and I didn't have any other commitments, and it seemed like the best way to live if you want to liberate the heart. And so I've been living as a monk all this time, and I'm very happy to encourage that wherever possible. I feel it is incredibly effective as a mode of living to bring about liberation. But if I attach to that, if I hold on to it as an identity and make the mind rigid around it or get judgmental, then I'm not using the form in a skillful way. So, next one. Oops. In America at the moment, particularly, black men and women are at an alarming rate being assaulted and killed by white policemen, George Floyd being the latest. The antiquated laws of this country, presuming this is coming from America, protect these cops from being held accountable for their actions. And the powers that be, who are overwhelmingly male and white, don't look to actively remedy the problem. How does one skillfully hold these feelings of frustration, anger, and helplessness when it comes to these types of injustice? It's the way things are, yes, but when the choices being made don't need to be made, it weighs heavy on the heart. Thank you for your teachings, Lumpur. May you and the entire Sangha all be and stay well. This is a very, very sort of tender and significant issue, not just now, but it's particularly acute now. There's sort of rioting and on the streets, and a great deal of anguish and distress and conflict in the USA. And having lived there for quite a long time, I'm very conscious of the extraordinary disparity. I would say American society is far more stratified than any country in Europe. The difference between the haves and the have-nots, the privileged and the unprivileged, the non-privileged, is enormous. Not just between the sort of white Americans and the Asian community, or the African American community, the Mexican Hispanic community, the Native American community, but there's a huge separation between those that have and those that have not, the privileged and the unprivileged. And this particular time, that's very, very acute, and there's great traumas and difficulties around the country right now. So I do really feel for that. In terms of how to hold those feelings, I think it's there's a combination of things, and two things in principle, I would say. Firstly, that one of the teachings of the Buddha is that's very significant in this. Even though there might be a lot of anguish and anger and frustration and rage that comes up, then the principle that hatred is never ended by hatred. Hatred is only ever ended by love. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. That teaching from the Dhammapada is extremely significant. So, as the mind moves towards hatred and ill will, then there's that's a flag to say that's not a road to go down. It doesn't mean that you condone what's being done, or you just become passive or switch off, but rather more hatred is only going to make things hotter and more conflicted and more anguished, more agitated, and more unworkable. So it's important to in a sense, to begin with having a loving kindness is established for that. Here is the feeling of helplessness. Here's the feeling of rage. This is the feeling of anger. It's like this. So there's an open-heartedness to your own feelings, your own emotions. It's not saying that you like them or that you're glad that they're there, but here they are. So I feel that that quality of loving kindness, the receptive aspect of loving kindness, is particularly important at times like this. And then from that basis, then we are not creating enemies or creating a fixed other that is an object of hatred, but rather we are recognizing, well, we're all human beings, we're all in this together, we're sharing a life. This one particular group seems to be heavily dominating and harming another group, which is unjust and is cruel and has a lot of suffering as a result of it. So we're not condoning that, but there is a recognition. Yeah, but that's the actions of certain people, and we need to divide the actions from the shared humanity that we have. That to say I disagree with your actions, I oppose your actions, but I will not hate you, and that's difficult to do. But I feel that the practice of Dhamma can really very effectively facilitate that, enable us to do that, so that yes, I love you completely, but I will do absolutely everything I can to get in your way and to stop you from harming others, without hypocrisy. Just because you want to obstruct someone's activity, or you want to protest against someone's activity, you want to raise your voice and object to what somebody is doing, it doesn't mean to say that you hate them. It doesn't mean to say that you are an enemy, or that you're forgetting your common humanity. When people get into a state of war with each other, one of the things that each country will tend to do is to try and demonize the other. That the enemy are not real people. They're not seen as being like us. The propaganda that nations put out is to dehumanize, to demonize the other, the people being labeled as the enemy. But it's interesting how many people who have been in the battlefield, have actually been in the war situation, that despite the intensity of conflict and being in a battleground situation, that still that sense of shared humanity, our common humanity, does take over. And I was a number of years ago, I was reading a survey they did. They interviewed people who'd been in battlefield confrontations from the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and other war zones, and they found that of the soldiers that they interviewed, the former soldiers they interviewed from those battleground situations, 60% aimed to miss. Whenever they shot their weapon, they aimed to miss, because that sense of that's another person there, that person that's there across the field over there, that I'm aiming at. They have a mother, they have a father, they have a family. They're like me. So I feel that to the degree possible, that to work with this, yes, we have to appreciate the issues and to try and establish justice and mutual respect and a sense of everybody abiding by the same contracts, the same rules, that we have common human agreements, and that's a basis of trust, a basis of communal harmony, is everyone agreeing to function according to the same principles, and that if we are able to communicate, if we can develop a sense of connection, a common humanity, then that ability to say come to agreements. We have to all be on the same page to the degree possible. So I would say the first things to do is to deal with your own feelings. The second things to do is to try and open up communication, to address and to speak from the basis of our shared humanity. And then the third thing is to try and to establish ways. I'm not a politician, or I'm not a social worker or a social activist, but to clarify what our common human agreements are. Just like in the monastery, we have the Vinaya discipline, we have the routine, the rules. And everyone who's living here is aware of what the structures are, and then the more that we are respectful of those common agreements, the more harmoniously we can live with each other. That's how it works. And so, in order to clarify what those agreements are, and to make sure that we've got those agreements are fair for everybody, that takes a communication. We need to be ready to listen to each other. We need to be able to speak our truth directly, and to be heard if possible. So that I feel that it's important to bear these different levels of practice in mind, both the inner qualities of attitude, and then with an attitude of absolute non-contention, of not refusing to make an enemy or to make an other. Then from that, then we can act, we can speak, we can act, we can contribute to the situation in ways that can lead, I would say, can lead to greater benefit for everybody. So that's my perspective on that. I think it's a very tense and difficult situation, and so there's no easy solutions, but that's what I would recommend. I'm also just recollecting when I lived in California, there was a protest by Earth First in a nearby redwood forest. It was owned by had been taken over by a company, Maxim Corporation, and they were going to clear cut this old growth forest. I think they bought the forest from the Pacific Lumber Company, and then Earth First asked for a number of volunteers to climb up in the trees to protect them. And this one particular person, young woman called Julia Butterfly Hill, volunteered, said, "Okay, I'll do it." She ended up being in this tree called Luna for at least 2 years. It didn't come down onto the ground for 2 years, and that was for anything. She was in the tree and she didn't come down. And she said she wouldn't come down until the forest was protected. And so she became quite well known, quite famous, and she was got in contact with us. And Ajahn Amaro became something of a teacher for her. We went down to visit her, and you had to talk by phone because you couldn't speak directly because it was so far away. But we could sit on the slope of the hill and sort of see her on 200 or 300 feet up in the tree, and we could see each other and then talk over the phone. Did some chanting for her. So one of the things that was very interesting about that, and how they managed to save the forest, and that she was effective, was when the protest got underway, then some of the people in the organization wanted her to speak out and cultivate, a kind of a campaign against the corporation and its head, Mr. Hurwitz. And she said that one of the things that she was learning by being up in the tree was that she couldn't encourage hatred. She couldn't encourage that kind of contention and making of enemies. And so the people in the organization got really upset with her. It's like, you're not doing your part properly. You're not reading the script. And she just said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I refuse. I won't encourage hatred. That's not what that's not what I've learned being up in this tree." So she had a bit of a falling out with the people of her own organization. But she was very intuitive and very dedicated, and so she said, "No, I'm going to stay in this tree, and I'm not going to cultivate hatred for Mr. Hurwitz or Maxim Corporation." And eventually, the company agreed, and the tree and that 200-acre, maybe even more, area was preserved. And she came down from the tree. And there's a wonderful photograph that circulated around that time of her meeting Mr. Hurwitz. And he's in sort of business suit and his kind of white shirt and a tie. And she's this kind of young, kind of hippie, eco-friendly, eco-warrior princess. And she's reaching out, and she's got her hand on his chest. And she's got this kind of sweet little smile on her face, like, "Hi, nice to meet you." And he's got this, "I'm not quite sure what to make of this. I'm kind of uncomfortable. This is kind of all right. Oh, thank you very much." All those different expressions were there, kind of, at least as I was seeing his face. And it was a very beautiful encounter. It was like, this is what non-contention is like. That if you don't make an enemy, if you refuse to contend, good results can still come from that. And I'm sure that whole thing had a radical impact on Mr. Hurwitz and his view of what he was doing and the work he did and the activities of his company were quite radically affected by that. So, next question. Is the experience of the different jhanas in meditation a necessary condition for stream entry and eventual enlightenment? Well, it's a common question. It's sometimes there's that assumption, or one can read the scriptures and get that impression sometimes, or certain teachers will say, it absolutely has to be this way. But it's interesting, particularly with stream entry. The Buddha names 4 factors supportive of stream entry. The first one is, again, sapurisa sangseva, drawing close to good people. So that's condition number 1. Who do you spend your time with? Drawing close to sapurisa, or to well-rounded or to good people. Second one is sadhamma savana, again the listening to the good Dhamma, or paying attention to skillful teachings. The third one is yoniso manasikara, so wise reflection or careful attention. And then the fourth one is Dhamma anudhamma patipada, it's practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. So that means practicing Dhamma in accordance with reality rather than out of obedience to a form, or based on self-view or an ambition or fear or desire to get something. So none of those mention jhana. There's no mention of concentration as a specific quality within that. And I'm conscious I'm being recorded, and this is a live webcast around the world, so perhaps people are hearing this and going, it's outrageous, how can you say that? But that's the fact. If you look at the 4 factors supportive of stream entry, then those are the 4. Or also when the Buddha, I think last week there was a question about how can someone tell whether they're a stream enter or not. The Buddha established this mirror of the Dhamma as a way of measuring. He said if someone wants to know whether they've reached the realization of stream entry, then there's the mirror of the Dhamma. Do they have unwavering faith in the Dhamma, in the Buddha and in the Sangha? Have they got faith in the Triple Gem? And are they keeping the sila? Are they keeping the precepts in a way that is very thorough and would be respected by the wise? Are they living in a way that is honorable, noble, harmless, and virtuous in all respects? So that again, jhana isn't mentioned. It's faith in the Triple Gem and the high quality of sila. So I feel that so concentration and jhana, it can be a skillful means, and certainly that's mentioned over and over. But I would say it's not a prerequisite at all. I mean, there's numerous instances where the Buddha's giving a Dhamma talk, whether it's to monastics or to lay people, and lots of people become stream enterers. They're listening to a Dhamma talk. They're not in jhana. They're hearing a talk. They're listening to words. They're focusing on language. Or like the encounter between Venerable Sariputta, and when he was a wanderer, even before he'd met the Buddha, he saw Venerable Assaji on his alms round and was so struck by Venerable Assaji's composure, his peaceful demeanor. And he said, well, who are you? You're very peaceful, you're very serene, you're very bright. What kind of practice do you do? Who's your teacher? And then Venerable Assaji, this was just shortly after the Buddha's enlightenment, and the first 5 disciples were still very close to the Buddha, and Asaji was one of those first five. And the Venerable Asaji said, "Well, I'm a disciple of the Samana Gautama, the Buddha Bhagawan, and all things that have a cause, and he has taught what the cause of those is, and that's the teaching of the great Samana, the great monk." And then hearing those words, I'm not quoting it absolutely accurately, since I can't remember the words precisely, but it was along those lines. When he quoted those words to Venerable Sariputta, then Sariputta immediately became a stream enterer. He awakened to the deathless, right there in the street. Asaji was on his arms round. So they weren't in jhana, they were having a conversation in the street. So there wasn't sort of a state of meditative absorption. Obviously, Sariputta, as a wanderer, was paying attention. He was keen to hear what Venerable Asaji was saying, but it wasn't like a state of absorption. So then there's numerous instances like that. So I feel it's a skillful means. It's a helpful attribute, something that is very beneficial. But I wouldn't say it's a prerequisite condition for stream entry. Next one. Dear Ajahn Amaro, last November, in my late 50s, I happily discovered Amaravati and Buddhism via the Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah. Since then, I've been practicing daily morning meditation, focusing on the breath. Moreover, I've been able to attain moments of stillness of mind and peace during meditation, which for me is remarkable. However, I've also been increasingly aware of the nada sound, especially after reading books written by you and Ajahn Sumedho. For me, the nada sound manifests itself via different frequencies in the background and is present 24/7. It's also pleasant and is always accessible. Furthermore, I've decided to switch my daily meditation from focusing on the breath to focusing on the nada sound, as this may also enhance mindfulness practice. Therefore, I would like to ask you whether one can achieve the stillness of mind and peaceful states via the nada sound, as is the case via breath meditation. Well, the first thing I'd say is that people vary, so the answer might be yes or no, because people have different dispositions. So for myself, I find listening to the nada sound far more appealing and effective and helpful as a meditation object than mindfulness of breathing, than the breath. Lumpur Pasano, that when we were together as co-abbots of Abhayagiri, he couldn't really relate to the nada sound very much, didn't particularly like to use it, but he was one who found the breath meditation, mindfulness of breathing, extremely helpful and effective. So for myself, I would say that my own experience is that using the nada sound is very, very effective, very helpful, and can bring profound states of clarity, peacefulness, brightness of mind. And that's my experience, but it's not going to be the experience for everyone. So, and it's like the example of Lumpur Pasano, Ajahn Pasano, that it wasn't something that he could particularly use, or it didn't work so well for him. It wasn't so effective, or he didn't sit quite so easily or comfortably or effectively in his own system. So I feel it's important for us to experiment, try things out, and then to learn from what works, and if it works, then use it. And it's up to you to find out what degree it can be effective. I can't guarantee what sort of degree of insight or peacefulness you might be able to realize on account of it, but certainly for myself, I find it's extremely effective. Next one. Dear Ajahn Amaro, I was reading Ajahn Dun's book, This is the Path. He mentions that including death contemplation in our practice can take us to realization of Sotapanna. Then there's a quotation. However, if we wish to go on to a higher attainment, we must revert to contemplating either the 32 parts of the body, the loathsomeness of the body, or the 4 elements, unquote. I don't recall coming across any other teachings that suggests such contemplation is so essential. Please enlighten us. Well, my response is, well, me too. So I have great respect for Ajahn Dun, and And so that might well be his experience, but I don't know. I don't think there's any kind of teaching in the Pali Canon, or that I've really heard from other ajahns that would say would confirm that as that's absolutely how it is, and it's always that way for everybody. But again, as I was just saying in response to the previous question, it's really what works for each of us as individuals, and so that I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Ajahn Dan. I mean, maybe that's exactly what his experience is, and that's how he's found things to be. Just as some people can't relate to the inner listening, the nada sound. It's like that's just a kind of biological reflex. It's of no value whatsoever. It's not a meditation object. It's just an annoyance. That's all it is, and that might be the experience. You can't deny that that's what that person's experience is. For somebody else, it's extraordinarily helpful, and it's like the gateway to liberation. And they go, this is amazing. This is incredible. Why didn't anyone tell me sooner? So that. Again, I would suggest that we use our own contemplations, we experiment, we see what the results are of the different things that we use, and then we learn for ourselves, because everyone is different. None of us are built exactly the same way, and so that sense of trying things out, seeing what the result is, what's called vimamsa, so that you put effort into things, you explore, you contemplate how to use a particular method of concentration or development of wisdom or a particular practice. Then the vimamsa is, okay, what was the effect of that? Where did it lead? What's the result? Where did that go to? And then you learn from the vimamsa. Just following a method, never really looking at the results of it and say, well, this is the method I was told, this is good, the Ajahn said I should do this because it's going to Nibbana, and then never looking at, well, what's the result of what you're doing? Then I would say you're not using the guidance, the teaching in a very effective way. That vimamsa, even though it's not a particularly commonly used term, vimamsa, it's the fourth of the four bases of success. In a way, it's one of the most important parts of Dhamma practice, that sense of where are we getting to. So, for example, it's like you might want to, in the days when people used to drive, if you want to go to London from Amaravati, you go south. But if you're out on the road and you're driving, and then the road signs say Manchester, then they say York, then they say Edinburgh, then they say Aberdeen, then that should tell you you're not heading towards London. You're going further and further north. You're into Scotland. And if you don't check and say, well, where is Manchester? Where is Edinburgh? And you don't pay attention to the signs of where you're getting to, then you realize you're way down the road before you realize, hang on a minute, Aberdeen, isn't that Scotland? We've been driving for 7 hours. We should be in London by now, but you're not, because you haven't been reading the signs. So vimamsa is reading the signs, and so that then as soon as you get onto the M1, and as soon as you see it says Milton Keynes, you go, oh, Milton Keynes, that's the wrong direction. Then you turn around. Dear Ajahn, could you please explain ahankara and mamankara again, and the ways to reduce the feelings of I, me, and mine in daily practice? So, okay, once again. So, ahang means I am. Kara is from the verb karoti, to make or to do. Mama is mine. It's the feeling of owning. So, ahankara is made of I am. Mamankara is made of mine, or made of mineness. So it's that I feeling, the mine feeling. This is mine. I am. This is me. This is mine. I am this. So it's a mental construction. It's a mental formation. It's like a psychological structure that is formed. And it has a purpose, that's part of our functioning as human beings and living in human groups, is we have names, we have identities, we have these bodies, so we relate to each other, and those relationships, then it's useful to have a way of referring to yourself, designating yourself, and that feeling of I, me, mine is part of that psychological conditioning, our way of socializing ourselves and functioning as part of a group. But it's not an absolute reality, and that's where it becomes tricky, and that's why that self-view is sort of number one of the obstacles to enlightenment, the number one of the 10 fetters, the sort of the handcuffs, the chains that bind the heart, is self-view. So that ahankara, mamankara is like that's the primary obstacle, is taking that I feeling as absolutely real. And so that one of the ways of working with it, you can take the reflection, the sort of wise reflection, the yoniso manasikara, investigation, say, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. That's one way of just reminding, like reinterpreting the flow of experience, like this body is not self, these feelings are not self, the sound of my voice is not self, it's not me, it's not mine, it doesn't have an owner. So you can take that negating say, style of approach. Another approach that maybe I've talked about recently or not, I forget, but is to go in the other direction, which is to inflate the sense of I, or inflate the sense of me or mine. Any of you who've seen the Pixar film Finding Nemo, if you can remember, there's a certain part of the film, there's a large number of seagulls, I think in the harbour in Australia, in Sydney, in Australia, and they're all perched on the docks and on the ships, and they're going, mine, 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 mine. I've got a suspicion there's some Dhamma practitioners in Pixar, because they've got a lot of very insightful things in their movies, and that this whole crowd of seagulls with this sort of kind of gormless mine, 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 mine. Maybe they were having a comment about some of the other people in the film industry, other people working at Pixar, but that's the feeling, the kind of absurdity of this is mine, this is mine, I am this is me, this is mine. That it's almost sort of childish, but very sort of tense and limiting habit. So in the meditation, you can simply take a word like mine and make the mind as peaceful as possible, as clear as possible, and just think that word, mine, this is mine, my body, this is mine. And when you inflate something like that, and just sort of bring it into the space of the mind and just sort of hold it there, this is mine. This is my body, my mind. Then right there, that word starts to sound ridiculous. Like, mine. Well, it helps to awaken that intuition in the heart that, well, what's this here that's doing the owning? And how can anything really be owned? Oh. And the point of that practice is that shift of view. Similarly, one of the most helpful things you can do is to just think the word I. Like, I. Not even I feel or I want or I don't want or even I am, just I. I. And when that's brought into consciousness and just let sort of hover in the space of the mind, again you get this sort of almost like vertigo, like kind of unsteady feeling. It's like, well, what the heck is that about? What does this I refer to? So it's a bit I and me and mine. They're a bit like a conjuring trick. They work as long as the conjurer's hands are moving. If you slow it all down and see it in like slow motion, you can see exactly what the conjurer is doing. The trick doesn't work. So this is like slowing the conjurer's hands down, so the trick is revealed. So that just letting the mind be as quiet as possible, as spacious as possible, then just thinking the word I. This is mine, mine. And not adding any commentary to it, just letting it have its effect, and feeling that weirdness, that absurdity. And the third suggestion I'll make with respect to this is your own name. I've got a lot of names now. Over the years, I've accumulated a few different names. But taking our ordinary name, like Amaro, which you use all the time, whatever your name might happen to be. Again, let the mind be as quiet and open as possible, and just think your name, Amaro, Amaro. And in exactly the same way, that because we use our name, we write it down, or we sort of sign up on the board for something, and we don't think twice about it. But like the conjurer's trick, it's because we're sort of on the move, and we're in action with it. But if you stop and then just let that sort of land in the space of the mind, there again there's this sort of strange dislocated feeling of like, what's that referring to? What's that about? What is that? Because it awakens the intuition of the heart, the citta, that that which this word is supposed to be referring to isn't a person. It's not a thing. Oh, and it's a bit like writing your name with the beam of a torch on a waterfall. It's like nothing is sticking. There's no traction. There's no thing there. It's just writing with a light beam on moving water. It's like there's no solidity. There's nothing permanent or substantial there. So that to the habits of self-view, that's very disorienting and confusing. But to the heart itself, to the citta, there's a sense of, oh, of course, there's a great relief. So these are other ways of working with the ahankara, mamankara habits. Dear Ajahn Amaro, I'd like to cultivate more contentment. Do you have any advice on this topic? Thank you. Contentment is a wonderful thing. So the Pali word is santuti, and there's a phrase that when people ask just as here in the UK, people say, "How are you?" How are you? And you say, "Oh, I'm fine." Or or in England we say things like, "I have no complaints," or "mustn't grumble." So in Thailand, they would say, "Sabai di mai?" Are you well? And often the response would be "Sabai di," I'm good. I feel good. But Lumpur Cha used to, when people said "Sabai di mai," Lumpur, are you feeling well, Lumpur? He would say "Di po di," which means good enough, good. And that was a particular response. So a particular response he would make, and so sometimes people would be like, "Oh, what does he mean by that?" Or he'd say "Po ton dai," which means it's endurable. It can be endured. So he wasn't saying it's great, but rather, it's okay. It's good enough. So I feel in terms of contentment, taking a principle like good enough, good enough, good, di po di, good enough, good, is a way of signaling or encouraging that quality of, things could be different, they could be better, but this is absolutely fine. This is good enough, good. I don't have to be hankering for anything extra. So, in terms of contentment, it's like working directly with our attitude, our habits of discontent or judgment, or like, oh, I'd like a bit more of that, or oh, if only I didn't have to bother with this, then everything will be fine. Just to take a principle like good enough, it's good enough, good, or it's bearable. Yeah, that's okay. As an active reflection to counterbalance those habits of judgment or impatience, or if it was a little bit different, then I would be happy, which much of the world runs on. That's a strong cultural say habit that if only things were a bit different, then I would be all right. Things would be good. So it's having said that, contentment doesn't mean passivity. So you have to balance contentment with effort and also goal-directedness. So, like in our practice, the Eightfold Path is a path because it's heading in a direction. The goal is the ending of dukkha. The goal is the realization of nibbana. It's a path because there's a direction. There's a teleology. There's a directionality. It's going somewhere. So. to be content doesn't mean just sort of sitting down on the ground and it's not a path, it's just a place for me to plunk myself and I'm not going anywhere. So it's not a passivity or switching off or disconnecting, but rather it's a relaxation so that there's more of the journey to be covered, but you're totally happy where you are right now. So it's like relaxing into the work that we do. So effort is being made, but that effort is not stressful, it's not obsessive, you're not kind of fixated on the goal, but with an attitude of ease and contentment, the direction is being followed to steer things towards that goal of ending suffering, if that makes sense. Okay, a couple more. Dear Ajahn Amaro, as I understand, usually our motivation for action is a search for a pleasant feeling of one kind or another. But in Dhamma practice, our goal is liberation from any kind of bondage. And in this case, sense pleasure is regarded as dangerous and misleading. In order to loose the grip of sensual pleasure, can you please describe the details of how these are born and what do they consist of? Because it seems that for a pleasant feeling to arise, there should be memory and wanting, otherwise it's just sensations, warm, cold, hard, soft, bitter or sweet. Is there some dismantling of contact and feeling for helping to let go of pleasure and pain? Good question. As all of the others have been too, but it's a bit to do with how the system gets habituated. We train ourselves to like particular flavors or sights or sounds by our conditioning, our family life, our education, our life experiences. So one of the teachings that is very helpful on this is, I think I've spoken about it a few times recently, is the discourse called the honey ball, or the sweet morsel, the Madhu Pindika Sutta. And in this, the description of the perceptual process is quite detailed, and how the mind sort of gets fixated on particular things that it follows. So it describes the process as being because of the six senses, there is sense contact, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. The six senses are there, so there's contact, phassa. So the phassa leads to a sensation, a vedana. So that sensation, it's wordless. It's just, and it's very, very simple. It's either pleasant, painful, or neutral. So that's in terms of our biological evolution, that's even something like an amoeba, like a monocellular entity, has this sense of pleasant, painful, neutral, like pleasant, go towards it, painful, move away from it, neutral, don't worry about it. So even at the most basic forms of life, there are these sensations are registered. So that's the primal relationship, even before the system has defined it as a sound or a color or a taste or a predator or whatever. So there's contact and then feeling, and then sanya is the next in this process. So sanya is related to the English word sign, designation. So that is where, the light goes into the eye, and the electrical impulse goes down the optic nerve and hits the visual cortex in the brain, and the brain registers a particular reaction. So it says cream color, or it says black, it says brown. There isn't the word brown or black or cream, but the visual cortex is registering that particular, say, formation as a color. Then rapidly after that sanya, there is vitakka, which is where the thinking mind comes in and says cream-colored or black or brown, or that's there's a patch of light on the floor. That's a person, that's a pillar, this is the sound of a bird. So that process happens very quickly, and the vitakka is the conceptual thought naming the experience. Then that leads into papancha, conceptual proliferation. Say, the patch of light, it's moved quite a long distance. We've been here for an hour and and 18 minutes, and so look how far the light has moved. I wonder where it'll get to by the time that we finish this session, or I wonder what that bird is that's singing out there. This is the conceptual proliferation taking hold of particular sights and sounds, thoughts, feelings, and whatever, and making a whole kind of elaboration, a complication, a story about them. And then the more the mind gets drawn into conceptual proliferation, then it makes the sense of me here and the world out there. And there's a tension between those two. Me afraid of something that the world is going to do to me, or me being annoyed by something the world is doing, or me being, attracted by something the world has got that I want to have. So in this respect about sense pleasure, when we see that sort of distractive process happening, then when we find the mind is getting caught in, I really would like to have a cup of tea, or I really like to go for a walk, or I want to enjoy that rose was about to bloom, I want to go and see if it's open so I can smell it. We recognize that train of thought and then follow that back and say, he was talking about the bird made me think of the garden, the thought of the garden made me think of the rosebud I saw yesterday, and now I'm sitting here waiting for this to be over so I can go and check on my rose. And so, it all began with Ajahn Amaro mentioning the bird. That's where it began, that sound of his voice, and it went there. So you follow it back, each kind of chain of proliferation, follow it back to its root, and at the very root is that sense of a sound, a thought, a feeling, a taste. And so that with the chasing after sense pleasure, the more that we can see and sort of follow those proliferations back, then we see where they come from. It's just a thought, it was just a sound, it was seeing a word written down, and that's where it began. And the further back you go, the closer to the root that we bring the attention, then the more peaceful and clear and uncomplicated it gets. So in terms of dealing with the pursuit of sense pleasure, then the more that we can see how it works, and there is a sort of demystifying. It's the glamour that particular experiences or perceptions have is lost. That they're seen more in their natural and ordinary perfection, but the mind is not so entranced to say, I only like this because of that association. There's no thing really there other than what the mind adds to it. And again, the point of that kind of practice is look at what my mind is adding to it, and it doesn't have to do that. So, a couple more. Does release, quote unquote, refer to the letting go that happens when the danger, quote unquote, is seen in gratification, quote unquote? If so, does seeing the danger equate to seeing the suffering that is bound up in experiencing sense pleasures for one who cannot see beyond self-view? So this is referring to the Buddha's comment about again about sense pleasure, to know the gratification, the asada, and then the liability, the adinava, or the danger, and then the release, the nisarana, with respect to the activity of the six senses, so that yes, that's a beautiful experience, but if the mind attaches to it, then it'll be painful. Therefore, let go, or don't attach. So I would say, in response to this, very simply, does seeing the danger equate to seeing the suffering? The answer is yes. That's the based on past experience and based on using wise reflection. It's like, if the mind hangs on to this and takes ownership of it, then it's going to be painful. Therefore, don't take ownership of it. Don't chase after it. Don't hang on to it. It's not ownable. It's not gettable. So whether you if you want to create suffering, you can, but whether or not you try to hold on to it, you won't be able to. And so the best thing to do is to, having seen the dukkha that's going to come from this, is to not pick it up in that way in the first place. Doesn't mean that we reject or fear or hate things, but just the mind is not sort of picking them up and owning them and relating in that possessive way to sense experiences. So that seeing the suffering that's bound up, that's the danger in it. It's like, if this is held onto, if this is identified with, there's going to be disappointment. So, and going right back to the very first question about death in the family or that kind of those painful experiences, that with again, I'm not a parent, but I'm not a biological parent. I have quite a few dozen nuns and monks who have me as their preceptor. It's a different kind of parenthood. But if we take ownership of our children, our offspring, then if there's the gratification of like, you're mine, I'm yours, you're mine, then there's going to be dukkha coming from that. And so that if there isn't that kind of attachment, if the mind sees that liability, and then the painfulness that's going to come from that sense of owning or possessiveness, then we relate to each other in a different way. There's a famous poem by Khalil Gibran that goes something like, "Our children are not our children. They are sons and daughters of life longing for itself," which many parents find a bit challenging. Our children are not our children. They are sons and daughters of life longing for itself. I feel it's very accurate, very helpful, very appropriate. And that the more that we can see each other in that way, that we are sons and daughters of life, we are the children of Dhamma, as it were. Our lives are the product and built of the fabric of nature. That's what we are. And so then if we shift the view, then the idea of owning nature or anything being possessible it fades away, and our relationship to our children, our parents, those close to us, it moves into a non-possessive fashion, which is not cold or indifferent or remote, but rather just like we can love nature and be in tune with it, and that's a spacious and delightful quality. That it changes the way that we love each other to be a non-possessive, a liberative love rather than a possessive one. Lastly, dear Ajahn Amaro, I've been participating in both Saturday and Sunday online sessions for 2 months. Enjoy and appreciate them so much! ! I'm in the US and would very much appreciate if Amaravati would continue having these online sessions after the lockdown ends. Thanks to you and everyone at Amaravati. The future is uncertain. No promises, but I appreciate that these are appreciated, and I'm very glad that we can be of use and benefit to people around the planet. So I hope that some of the things that have been said and reflections offered, that if things are useful and helpful, then please take them and use them. If things are not helpful or confusing or obstructive, then please leave them aside.